that this is absolute and complete nonsense. Again, it should be ridiculed at the highest order. You should be taking the cast review as seriously as it took itself, using AI-generated images to demonstrate what they think trans people look like. But you don't really get a feel for how fucked up the books are unless you start to understand the entirety of the series, in which this is a children's series where slavery is a thing. There's something called house elves who are slaves to their masters. They can be freed if they're given a item or part or garment of their own possession back to if the master like opens up a book and like there's that trick where Dobby does that whole thing. You remember it from the movies or something like that. Anyways, they're slaves in the series, and the only character who recognizes that they're slaves and that slavery is bad is Hermione. And Hermione tries telling everyone else, hey, by the way, we should probably end the whole slavery thing, and is ridiculed for her beliefs by the rest of the people, who eventually start using slave apologia, such as, oh, well, they're much happier as slaves. Yes, they wouldn't know if they were liberated what they could actually do in the real world. It would be terrible for them, so it's better that they continue to be slaves. And in the end of the series, and sorry, spoiler warning for the Harry Potter people who have missed out on this enormously popular cultural icon, it's just never addressed. And that's just the end of it. It just, like, slaves continue being slaves, and then the series goes on. But you do achieve the happy ending when the ultimate evil was defeated, aka Voldemort, by collecting all the Horcruxes and all that kind of stuff. And yes, we defeated the ultimate evil. The world is saved. Continue enjoying your house elves, everybody. Who are better off, again, being slaves in the series. So enjoy that. Tons of fucked up stuff. A lot of fucked up stuff, not only towards, like, obviously, you know, the racist names that she's using, Shacklebolt, and what did she name one of her first Jewish characters? Was something Goldstein or something like that, towards indigenous people, and obviously trying to say, and going to the old tropes of, you know, them being some kind of, like, divine, spiritual, you know, once the noble savage hath been tamed kind of shit. All the way to the idea of blood quantum playing a pivotal role inside the series itself, and not ever really being truly addressed or identified for what it is, and the parallels it had to, again, the kind of things the Nazis were doing. But it's just kind of something that I think is happening now to a lot of people who start to get in bed with, you know, let's just say, persecuting queer folk, going after trans people as their kind of entry into doing that, and then realizing that they have a lot of connections and ties to, say, neo-Nazis. That's why you're seeing people like InfoWars, you know, Alex Jones's outfit, saying things like this. InfoWars host claims that the Holocaust is, quote, a religion, and that you can't question it. Harrison Smith says, the truth about the Nazis is, quote, somewhere in between, that they never did anything good for anybody ever, and they never did anything wrong ever. You only start to try to do this if you realize that your own beliefs are aligning with the Nazis, and then how do I kind of reconcile that, right? I mean, in the case of J.K. Rowling, she's got to do kind of history revisionism and be like, well, that's just a fever dream. They never targeted trans people like I target trans people. That never happened. In the case of the InfoWars guys, it's kind of like, well, I mean, we're supposed to believe in this whole, like, 6 million Jews died, and that was a horrifying thing. The Nazis never did anything good, but, I mean, why aren't we allowed to ever talk about maybe some of the things they accomplished? Why is that conversation not allowed to be had, you know? Quote, there's like two different versions, right? There's the lowercase h and the capital H, Holocaust, where like there were terrible things that happened in World War II. Obviously, fucking obviously. You don't even need the gas shit. Like the ditches, the dead bodies, I mean, it was horrible. So there's a reality of civilian deaths in World War II, civilian mistreatments in World War II, on, you know, ethnic basis or whatever. But then there's the capital H, Holocaust, which is basically religious. I mean, it basically has tenets that you have to accept, and you have to take it on faith. I mean, it has all these qualities of religion. Like, this is just straight up Holocaust denial. You can call it revisionism, you can call it Holocaust denial at night, but it is Holocaust denial, and it's being broadcast on InfoWars. And like the InfoWars network has had to deal with not only having actual neo-Nazis as hosts, and then those neo-Nazis get kicked off when they get too neo-Nazi-ish, to having people like Ye come on to talk about how much he loves Hitler and shit like that, to even Alex Jones himself being like, oh, but you're talking about the costumes, right? And you love the costumes. We all love the costumes. That's what's going on. You probably even question like the resurrection during the Inquisition more than so you could question the Holocaust now. And again, it's like, it's not even like there's definitely one side or definitely be the other. It's like what you're just pointing out, Vince, where you're like, you literally illegal to question it. And like, okay, I'm clearly missing something there, so it's not getting the whole picture. Well, that depends. What are you questioning? Are you questioning the horrifying war crimes of the Nazis? The systemic execution of Jewish people by the Nazi killing and death machine? The genocide of Jewish people by the Nazi killing death machine? If you're questioning that, then I'd be like, well, yeah, I mean, that I'm not saying it's illegal to do that, but you are certainly trying to do historic revisionism. You're trying to change what actually happened to fit your own beliefs or worldview, and you want to downplay the crimes of the Nazis, which again is really fucked up. The Nazis were bad. I'd like to try and normalize saying this again. Fuck the Nazis. The Nazis were bad. But I guess that's just the time and age that we live in. And this brings us to the cast review, which J.K. Rowling is obviously very, very happy. So is Glinner. So is, I'm sure, Ricky Gervais, but he hasn't spoken out about it. But all the prominent UK transphobes feel they just got themselves a massive win with the cast review, which is basically a very pseudo-scientific review done in part to be able to guide what NHS policy should be towards trans children specifically. The cast review, as I've already done and pointed out here, refused to look at look at nearly 50 studies that actually interviewed trans people and studied trans people who had undergone puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, and had become trans adults to, basically find out whether or not they were satisfied with the medical procedures that they'd used. They justified rejecting nearly 50 studies on the topic. The idea of giving someone HRT as part of a double-blind controlled study would be incredibly unethical. Very, very unethical, which is why it's not done. Doctors in Canada spoke out very, very strongly against the cast review, as have doctors in a number of other countries, as have, again, every major medical association in the United States who investigates into the use of gender-affirming care has conclusively shown that it does have very tangible benefits for people who are experiencing gender dysphoria and can be very beneficial for them, have also begun speaking out against it. Doctors in Canada, for example, said that this is as if you were to say that you couldn't provide care for pregnant women based on the fact that you had not conducted specific double-blind test studies on people who weren't pregnant women, which again would be enormously unethical to start trying to give people who aren't pregnant with a child drugs to find out in a double-blind controlled study test whether or not those drugs affected pregnant women in a certain way, because what if it had devastating effects on people who weren't within the group that you're trying to investigate, which is why the whole thing is so incredibly messed up. But that brings us to another and even more fucked up thing the cast review did, which is this. Cast report used AI-generated images of gender non-conforming children. Some images of children used to illustrate the cast report were generated by artificial intelligence, it has been confirmed. Because not only were you refusing to look at studies that actually looked at trans people, or spoke to trans people, or actually could give you some insight into the trans experience, you had to invent trans people. That's how far you had to go. You couldn't talk to actual trans people. You had to make fake trans people up using AI. And then be like, this is what we believe a gender non-conforming person may look like. Yes. Science. Science. The review into the structure of gender-affirming care for trans youth, published last week, used several AI-generated images, including a portrait of a child with short pink hair, to illustrate the 400-page document officials have confirmed. NHS England commissioned pediatric expert Dr. Hilary Cass led a review in 2020 in response to the sharp rise in referrals to what then England's only youth gender clinic. The fully published documents build on the guidance of an interim report in 2022, which recommends that the Tavistock Clinic in North London be closed in favour of regional hubs across England. The new recommendations included a, quote, holistic approach to treatment and urged clinicians to exercise extreme caution in prescribing hormones, such as puberty blockers, to patients under the age of 25. It treated people who were age 24 as children, which, great job. It also said that there was a biological association between what toys kids gravitate towards. As in, it's in your fucking DNA, boys. If you're a cis man, that you will gravitate as a child towards hammers and trucks and tools and building. And if you happen to be a cis woman, well, then you're biologically going to gravitate towards mops and brooms and cleaning and cooking and dolls and princesses. Unicorns? Maybe both, all right? It could be in the DNA of men and women to go towards unicorns. We don't fully know yet. The science is unsettled on that. But while we investigate it, know that this is absolute and complete nonsense. Again, it should be ridiculed at the highest order. You should be taking the cast review as seriously as it took itself, using AI-generated images to demonstrate what they think trans people look like. That's profoundly fucked, especially insofar as this is going to be used to try and guide policy, or sorry, I should say is being used to guide policy. I'm going to show you a documentary now, a little bit of it, on Channel 4, in which people who are trans in England, some of whom have had to wait over 4 years to receive any form of gender affirming care that they've been applying for. It's not the revolving door that you've been lied to and led to believe, that you simply walk into a clinic and you're like, hey, I think I might be gay. I think I might like boys. And like, no, you're not gay. You're trans because it makes us more money, apparently, in the NHS. Either way, yes, here's the pills you seek. Yeah, go out there, come back, and very quickly we will mutilate the genitals, as we do here in the revolving door system of, healthcare. Every image was also scrutinized. An image of a child leaning against a wall was noted to be potentially AI generated, given that their fingers appeared to be fused together. Science. And this is the science we're dealing with here. This is how we're going to guide public policy. Did no one just look over and be like, what's going on there? Oh, that's just how fingers fing. You see? That's what fingers do. And they do this. that's a normal hand. Like, what the ever-loving fuck? Not use images that could be identifying any individuals. Yeah, we didn't want to use actual trans people in our report. We wanted to use fake ones to build a narrative. A reverse image search of the picture on page 233 revealed that it had come from Adobe stock and was titled "Non-Binary Teen in School Hallway with Kids in Background, Generative AI." Searches for non-binary teenager in Adobe stock reveal a wide range of AI-generated images of teenagers with short pink hair and piercings. The increasing adoption of AI has raised questions about its potential impact on marginalized communities. Artificial intelligence has the potential to erase human bias, but also has the potential to reinforce discrimination and stereotypes associated with the LGBTQ+ community. So, taking all of that and JK's amazing stuff, let's take a look.
Oh, can we go to the beach whenever during the holidays?
14-year-old Frankie is one of 5,000 children and young people desperate to be seen at NHS England's 2 new gender clinics. But he and his mum have given up on ever walking through their doors.
While I was 9 and I went to a GP about me being trans left think, that's when I got diagnosed with gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia.
In the 5 years he's been waiting, first for the Tavistock and now these new services, he's not spoken to one medical professional, even over the phone.
5 years.
Suffering false hope after false hope.
They referred me, we've got nothing back from them for almost 5 years. I think with the 3 to 6 month thing, when they said that to us, that's happened about 3 times, where they've said to us, like, you'll be seen soon, you'll get an appointment soon.
Like so many other children, he's been failed by a health service unable to serve the rapidly changing and increasing number of those who need its help. The doors of its one clinic closed down, the 2 set up in its place, struggling to recruit staff. This, a medical community...
And I wonder why that is, J.K. Rowling, Haya Rychek, Matt Walsh. I wonder why people would be terrified to work in these clinics. Wonder what all the terrorism that was directed towards abortion doctors was supposed to achieve. What kind of effects that can have. And again, like, people really need to put into focus the fact that this affects, like, we're talking under 1,000 children who are seeking to get puberty blockers in England. Like, they keep telling you the story that there's this revolving door system where literally tens of thousands of kids are having their genders changed. Some of them are just gay, but they can't choose. They go into these clinics. The clinics immediately try to put them on puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy or give them surgery on the spot. That's how the whole thing works. And it's a travesty, I tell you, an absolute travesty. It's going to destroy an entire generation of people who a couple years later will realize they're not actually girls or boys at all. They were boys and girls. And this whole thing is a complete and utter devastation of the next generation. And it's like, this is a group, again, a minority of the population who have been recognized overwhelmingly by the medical community for having the necessity to get this kind of gender affirming care, and you just want to stand in the way. You want to involve yourself and make their lives a living hell, which you are succeeding at, unfortunately. That's the really fucked up and sad thing about the J.K. Rowlings, about the Glinners, about all these motherfuckers who go around thinking that they're doing what they're doing to save the world from the dreaded female penis and all this other weird ass shit. It does have real world consequences. And then we are talking about a system that already is failing trans people. You can tell with, this boy, he has been waiting, what, 5 years? 5 years to be able to get anything?
That doesn't yet agree on best practice. Today, an independent report commissioned by NHS England found that children had been badly let down. Its chair's message to young people this morning.
This is not about taking care away from them. Hormone treatments may be appropriate, but keeping their options open is a key part. I've spoken to young adults who've had very successful medical transition and are really thriving. I have also spoken to young adults who perhaps regret their decision. But I think what I found very distressing really is the people who are just sitting on a waiting list, not knowing what's going to happen to them.
For 4 years, the CAS review, Gender Identity Services for Children and Young People, was finally released last week. Almost immediately, numerous people with ties to anti-trans campaigns began their victory laps. The review, which generally goes against the position of trans groups, advocates, and the medical community, by the way, called for further restrictions on and to delay access to treatment for trans adults and youth. It's important to understand why conservatives felt it necessary to commission Dr. Hilary Klass. Anti-trans groups claim that 5,000 children a year are being rushed through gender identity development services against their better judgment, that children are being, quote, sacrificed on the altar of gender ideology, that their bodies are rotting from puberty blockers, and that 1,000 families are lining up to sue GIDs for medical negligence towards their children, and that detransitioning rates are skyrocketing. But what did the review find? None of that. Of 3,499 GID patients CAS audited, only 27% had been referred to endocrinology, the NHS department that prescribed puberty blockers and hormone therapy, and an average of 6.7 appointments. Of these, only 54% had received a prescription. Fewer than 10 of the 3,499 had detransitioned. Fewer than 10. You don't hear this part of the CAS review coming out there, by the way, but sure. In the end, the anti-trans victory lap barely made it a few feet before being overtaken by hundreds of academics, experts, and service users exposing the review as a sham. Over 100 academics signed an open letter by the Feminist Gender Equality Network condemning the review as, quote, dangerous and potentially harmful to trans children due to unsound methodology, unacceptable bias, and problematic and supported conclusions. Therapists Against Conversion Therapy and Transphobia slammed the review as having an eliminationist agenda dressed up in the language of reasonableness, urging clinicians to treat the review's findings with, quote, extreme caution. Underpinning the report, wrote trans rights group Transsexual, is the idea of being trans is an undesirable outcome rather than the natural facet of human diversity. This part is also very key. The few positive responses to the CAS review from reputable organizations read as if it was written at gunpoint, or at least as hopelessly naive. Even those involved in the review have expressed dismay of how it was conducted. Kat Burton, chair of the Gender Identity Research and Educational Society, one of the organizations consulted by the CAS review team, took to X and Twitter to say, after 3 discussions, it was obvious that the review had been written before we started. Hilary Klass totally discounted evidence from trans people on the basis of knowledge of lived experience. In fact, CAS discounted all kinds of evidence. CAS collected 50 studies about puberty blockers and excluded half as, quote, low quality, while only marking one as high quality. Many were rejected due to not having sufficient control groups. Critics have noted that the, quote, gold standard of the double-blind randomized control trial, a benchmark CAS used in her review, is patently unethical when it comes to puberty blockers, not to mention impossible to implement, as those receiving the placebo soon realize their puberty isn't being blocked. On LinkedIn, Dr. Jazz Lopez, a medical anthropologist based in Bradford, said he would have failed this report as an undergraduate submission. Among CAS's recommendations in a report was, quote, puberty blocker trial. While such practices aren't uncommon for new drugs with unknown safety risks, puberty blockers have been used safely since the 1980s, primarily for androgen deprivation therapy in the treatment of some cancers in adults. They are also used sometimes prescribed to children with precocious puberty when a child enters puberty far ahead of their age group. It isn't the drug that's on trial here, it's trans children. CAS also suggested that at the rate at which young people move from puberty blockers to subsequent hormone treatment may, as anti-trans groups have warned, prove puberty blockers help cement a trans identity in these youth. They're basically stating something that, again, is given to children to buy them time to make a very important decision in their lives, that this is in fact influencing their decision, that, oh, well, when they go on puberty blockers, it makes them more trans, you see, and that's a danger. And we don't want people who aren't trans to be misidentified as being trans by going on puberty blockers, so this is why they're evil. Her data for this fact is that 2 studies, nearly all trans youth prescribed blockers went on to take hormones. Of course, this finding could just as easily suggest that puberty blockers are being prescribed very precisely, a possibility Hilary Klass is not entertained for even a second. Again, this is why, like, this whole thing from the get-go, I was like, it reeks of unscientific bias and that people are trying to push their own agenda while ignoring a overwhelming amount of conclusive evidence, again, globally. This is not something that's only being studied in the UK or only being studied in America. While roundly ignoring the evidence of experts, the review mysteriously arrives at many of the same conclusions that anti-trans groups did years ago. CAS recommends that adults aged 17 to 25 use an intermediary gender service instead of being referred to adult services. For example, a recommendation straight out of the mouth of anti-trans groups are Duty, which has long pushed to ban gender transition for under 25s. The influence of anti-trans groups like Sex Matters, Therapy First, and Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, all of whom appear in the citations, can be felt throughout the review. More worrying still, many of CAS's conclusions are based on evidence that does not corroborate, in some cases directly contradicts her findings. For example, her recommendation of an intermediate series based on the idea that brains don't reach maturity until the age of 25, a notion Dean Burnett, a neuroscientist and author of The Idiot Brain, describes as guff. I love that. Guff based on hearsay, misunderstanding of neuroscience, or willful ignorance. Basically, again, classifying 24-year-olds and younger as children. On closer inspection, the citation CAS uses for assertions that young adults' brain development in 2016 study about how adolescent brain is excellent at learning and adapting contains nothing that would justify delaying someone's access to transition. The CAS review was hyped as a nail in the coffin for a lawless cult of child mutilators, and after that we got was a 400-page GCSE sociology essay that ignored decades of research in favor of pure vibes. How embarrassing. Well, it would be cool if we could just like openly mock it and laugh at it, but it's very sad that it is going to have and is having right now real world consequences on people who need access to healthcare.
Development remains unknown.
I think it's definitely the case that ideology on all sides has directed care rather.
That's so rich you would say this. When, yes, ideology has poisoned your brain. This is a brain on ideology, you know? They always talk about gender ideology as some kind of corruptive force that's destroying society, but like it's only affecting a very small amount of people insofar as there's transphobes who are trying to consistently use it to justify their own bigotry in one way or another. Yes, let's release a review that ignores the overwhelming majority of studies that have studied this topic and then say conclusively that this is how the world should be. And if people want to know what trans people look like, we got AI. We can show you AI photos of trans people. Yes. This is a gender non-conforming person. I think. It's hard to tell because they don't exist. But yep, here's the cover photo. Got that. Okay, cool. Good to go. Good stuff. Great work. The cast review. And I also want to say just a content warning for the next couple stories because they do deal with people unaliving themselves or being hurt through this process. Trans happiness falls by over 50% in a decade in Scotland. Growing up as a trans person in Scotland isn't what it used to be, according to an eye-opening report into the happiness of trans youth. A survey of over 1,200 LGBTQ plus people aged 13 to 25-year-olds in the region found that general happiness amongst trans people has dropped by a whopping 50% in a decade. Participants were also asked, how happy do you feel with your life as an LGBTQ young person in Scotland? The percentage of trans respondents feeling happy or very happy dropped to 59% in 2012 to just 28% in 2022. Again, J.K. Rowling, Glinner, you know, all these assholes, Dave Chappelle. This can have a lot of real-world effects when you see a lot of people who you might have considered your heroes at one point or another consistently spreading misinformation, lies, and fear-mongering. The report also found that just 1 in 3 trans people felt their hometown was a safe enough space to socialize in. The findings come as part of a report by LGBTQ plus youth in Scotland, a non-profit charity dedicated to improving the lives of queer youth in Scotland, as well as sharing eye-opening statistics as part of the survey result. The report also makes a range of recommendations to address systemic and societal issues that trans people face. These problems include issues that stem from the, quote, lack of full societal acceptance, as one youth survey respondent put it. I'm very proud of who I am and to be part of the LGBTQ plus community, they said, but it does come at the cost of feeling safe in public, which should never be the fucking case. Failures by all services involved in trans teens' care likely contributed to his death, inquest finds. A jury inquest has concluded that systemic failures by services supporting Jason Pullman, a trans teenager who took his own life, could have contributed to his death. 15-year-old Jason Pullman was found dead in Hampton Park, Eastbourne, on the 19th of April 2022. The Independent reports during a 5-day inquest into Hastings Coroner Court. Jurors also heard how Jason's parents, Emily and Marks, last saw their son on April 18th at 7:30. They reported Jason's disappearance to the police. I strongly believe that if he was listened to, he would have been found. The jury concluded there were failing by all services involved in Jason Pullman's care, including the police, who were found to have inadequately responded to his disappearance. The jury said Jason's emotional and mental health needs were inadequately addressed and provided for. Says ITV News for covering the story and highlighting the long waits for trans people currently in invasive care in the United Kingdom.
Hello and welcome back. There were criticisms of both care Organisations and police today at the inquest into a trans teenager whose body was found in a park. The inquest ruled that 15-year-old Jason Pullman, who was found dead in a park in Sussex 2 years ago, took his own life. The hearing said gender dysphoria was a contributing factor in Jason's death, but it also pointed to delays to his treatment. Layla Hayes reports.
15-year-old Jason Pullman, who was transgender, had a history of mental health problems, including self-harm and abuse of drink and drugs. In February 2020, he was put on the waiting list for an NHS gender dysphoria assessment. But by the time he died, more than 2 years later, he had still not been seen.
2 years later, earlier we heard a story of 4 years later. It keeps, like, the real world examples seem to be that there's a massive delay, a huge amount of waiting time involved for something that we're consistently told is a revolving door, where people simply go into gender clinics, you know, and then they're told immediately, well, we think you're trans, and then they're immediately given a whole bunch of puberty blockers or surgery instantaneously, which doesn't seem to be the case.
His mum and stepdad say they had to watch him deteriorate.
We felt very unlistened to. We felt what did Jason need to present to warrant having intensive help, because he clearly needed it.
And how much do you think the fact that he was on this waiting list contributed to his deterioration in mental health?
In Jason's mind, it was everything. In his mind, that's what he needed.
A year, 2 years to an adult, that exactly. To a child with a mental health condition, I mean, you can't, unless you suffer with that, you can't put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, it's absolutely fucked, genuinely. And again, like, you know, the people who want to continue to push this narrative seem to ignore every other study that comes out, including studies of just genuinely, how is your well-being after you receive gender-affirming care? Or how's your well-being after you've received gender-affirming care throughout your entire lifetime? How is your well-being if you were a, say, trans kid who grew up and got to transition and you had the privilege to do so? What exactly was the before and after? How are the results? If they're overwhelmingly positive by nearly every single review that looks at this, and if you can look at meta studies that actually track different reviews and then point to conclusively that this has overwhelmingly positive results, well, then again, anyone who is trying to push an alternative narrative to that has to ignore a lot of the science, has to ignore a lot of the studies, has to ignore a lot of the results, and has to ignore trans people. A survey of more than 90,000 trans people in the US, the largest nationwide survey of any community ever, found that trans people continue to experience workplace and medical discrimination. However, the overwhelming majority of them still report more life satisfaction after having transitioned. The National Center for Trans Equality, or NCTE, one of the largest trans rights organizations, released its 2022 US Trans Survey. Early Insight reports Wednesday after a year-long delay due to, in part, the pandemic. The survey, the most comprehensive look to date at life for trans people in the US, comes as hundreds of bills in the last 3 years have attempted to roll back trans rights, most often by restricting trans people's access to transitional related care and trans students' ability to play school sports. There's still a drought of information available to lawmakers, the media, and advocates regarding our experience and our needs. At best, we're working in a vacuum of information. At worst, we're combating dangerous misinformation being spread by anti-trans extremists. Without question, the misinformation and lack of understanding is underpinning these escalating legislative attacks against our community. The organization 2015 US Trans Survey has been the largest survey of trans people in the country, with nearly 28,000 respondents 18 and older, and has been widely cited, included by Congress and the Supreme Court. Josie Caraballo, the director of the survey, said in 2022 iteration, more than tripled the number of respondents with a total of 92,329 from every state and many US territories, and was improved in a number of other ways. For example, included 605 possible questions, so no respondent received all the possible questions, up from 324 in the 2015 survey, and included more than 8,000 respondents who were 16 and 17. However, survey authors noted that respondents who participated in the online survey were not drawn from a random sample, and though the sample is large, the findings may not be representative of all trans people. Of the 84,170 adult respondents, 38 identified as non-binary, 35 identified as trans women, 25 identified as trans men, and 2 identified as cross-dressers. Continued discrimination and mistreatment. Amongst the key findings released Wednesday, the survey found that trans people continue to report experiencing discrimination and mistreatment because of their gender identities and/or expressions. More than one-third of adult respondents, or 34%, were experiencing poverty at the time of the survey. 18% were unemployed. More than 1 in 10, or 11% of respondents who had never held jobs said that they were fired or forced to resign or had lost jobs or been laid off from their gender identities or expressions. And in line with previous survey findings, 30% of respondents had experienced homelessness in their lifetimes. Of adult respondents who saw healthcare providers in the previous 12 months, 48% reported having had at least one negative experience because they were trans, including being refused healthcare, having staff members use the incorrect pronouns for them, or having providers use abusive language or be physically rough or abusive while treating them. Fear of mistreatment prevented 24 respondents of seeing doctors when they needed it 12 months before the survey. Many respondents also reported past mistreatment in school. Of adult respondents, 80% who were perceived as trans in the K-12 experience, one or more forms of mistreatment included verbal harassment, physical attacks, online bullying, or being denied use of restrooms and locker rooms that match their gender identities. Of the 8,159 respondents who were 16 and 17, 60% reported such mistreatment. Higher life satisfaction after transition. Despite those negative experiences, the vast majority of adult respondents, 79%, who lived at least some of the time in different genders, said from when they were assigned at birth, responded that they were a lot more satisfied with their lives. An additional 15% reported they were a little more satisfied. The overwhelming majority of people. This report shows glaringly the problem is us cis people and the way we're treating trans people, and the same applies to other groups of people who are being marginalized by society. The problem is the societal treatment. That's what this is coming down to, is that the society being, again, this is a cis-normative society, is treating trans people like absolute garbage.
Howdy everybody. I just wanted to let you know that for the cost of a cup of coffee, you can unlock bonus uncensored episodes of Mind Explosions by going to patreon.com/theserfs. Our videos couldn't exist without your support, and all our content is released early to our Patreon subscribers, as well as a ton of extra content you can't get anywhere else. Please like, subscribe, and thumbs up this channel, and if you're feeling extra perky, share it anywhere you think people would like to see or learn from our videos. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. We first want to give a shout out to everyone who makes this show possible. This program is produced thanks to the generous support of our Patreon supporters: Anna Loves Riley, Irian McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbar Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Peanut Butter Blondie, Political Poppy, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Bomey, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Ruby, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demmel, Travis McClinton, and Words Greenwood. As well as every other person you see on the screen right now, this show would not be possible without them. And if you want to join these wonderful people who make this entire program possible, simply go to patreon.com/theserfs and you can unlock uncensored and bonus episodes and, you know, help us exist.